That morning, nobody knew the compound was supposed to be empty. November 27th, 1950. The temperature was minus 37 degrees Fahrenheit when Sergeant Major Patrick O'Brien led his reconnaissance team across the frozen Chosin Reservoir. 8 men, handpicked from the 1st Marine Division, moving through North Korean territory that intelligence said was unoccupied, carrying orders that were classified above their security clearance, orders that came from someone who didn't officially exist in the military chain of command. The mission was simple: investigate reports of enemy chemical weapons development, gather evidence, extract without engagement. Standard intelligence gathering for the Korean conflict. Except nothing about this mission was standard, starting with the fact that they were operating 40 miles behind enemy lines without air support, artillery backup, or extraction plan, without communication with friendly forces, without any way to call for help if something went wrong. Staff Sergeant Michael Chen adjusted his rifle and scanned the tree line ahead. Chinese-American Marine, who spoke fluent Mandarin and Korean, had volunteered for this assignment because he believed the intelligence reports about chemical weapons, because he trusted his commanders to tell him the truth about why they were risking 8 lives in frozen wasteland, because he thought classified missions were classified to protect national security, not to hide activities that violated international law. Behind him, Corporal James Rodriguez carried the radio equipment that hadn't worked for the past 6 hours. Puerto Rican kid from Chicago, 22 years old, had enlisted to escape poverty and serve his country, wanted to return home with medals and stories about stopping communist expansion in Asia, had no idea that stopping communism sometimes required using methods that were indistinguishable from communist tactics, that freedom sometimes required activities that destroyed freedom for everyone involved. The compound appeared through the morning mist, like something from a nightmare, not the crude bunkers and temporary shelters that characterized most North Korean military installations. This was sophisticated architecture, concrete buildings designed for permanent occupation, guard towers positioned for optimal surveillance, fencing that looked more like a prison than a military base, and most disturbing of all, smokestacks that were still producing smoke despite intelligence reports that claimed the area had been abandoned for weeks. Private First Class David Thompson raised his binoculars and studied the facility. Southern boy from Alabama who had grown up hunting in forests that prepared him for reconnaissance work, expert marksman, natural camouflage specialist, could move through hostile territory without leaving traces. But nothing in his training had prepared him for what he was seeing through those binoculars. Buildings that were clearly designed for industrial production, laboratories that belonged in universities, not military installations, and personnel moving between buildings who weren't wearing North Korean uniforms, weren't wearing Chinese uniforms, were wearing civilian clothes that looked distinctly American. Sergeant First Class Anthony Martinez carried the demolitions that were supposed to destroy any chemical weapons they discovered. Mexican-American Marine from Texas, had lost his brother in the early fighting around Seoul, volunteered for dangerous missions because he believed killing communists would avenge his family, because he trusted that American forces were fighting for justice and freedom, because he thought the explosives he carried would be used to eliminate weapons that threatened innocent people, not to destroy evidence of activities that American officials couldn't afford to acknowledge. The facility was operational, not abandoned, not captured, not destroyed by bombing raids that intelligence claimed had eliminated all enemy capabilities in the region. Operational, and apparently conducting activities that required sophisticated equipment, trained personnel, and ongoing logistical support. Activities that someone was willing to risk 8 Marine lives to investigate, or eliminate, or cover up. Corporal William Johnson was the medic, Irish-American from Boston, whose father had served in World War I and told him stories about chemical weapons that made grown men weep with terror, had joined the Marines to prevent those weapons from being used again, to protect American soldiers from gas attacks that could kill thousands in minutes, had no idea that preventing chemical weapons sometimes required manufacturing chemical weapons, that protecting American lives sometimes required sacrificing them to maintain plausible deniability about activities that couldn't be officially sanctioned. Private Robert Williams handled communications and intelligence gathering, African-American Marine from Detroit, who had joined the military to escape racial discrimination and serve a country that claimed to value equality, expert in codes and encryption, could operate radio equipment under combat conditions, could intercept and decode enemy communications, but the communications he was intercepting weren't in Korean or Chinese, were in English, were using American military codes, were discussing American activities at what was supposed to be a North Korean chemical weapons facility. Lance Corporal Frank Anderson was the youngest, 18 years old, farm boy from Iowa, who had never seen a city larger than Des Moines before shipping to Korea. Natural athlete, fast learner, eager to prove himself in combat, had volunteered for this mission because he wanted to be part of something important, something that would make a difference in the war, something that would justify the sacrifices American forces were making in a conflict most Americans didn't understand, had no idea that making a difference sometimes meant discovering differences that couldn't be acknowledged without destroying everything you believed about why you were fighting. O'Brien signaled for his team to observe the compound from concealed positions. 20-year Marine veteran who had fought in the Pacific during World War II, had seen combat at Guadalcanal and Iwo Jima, understood that war required difficult decisions and moral compromises, but also understood that some activities crossed lines that couldn't be uncrossed, that some orders required questioning, even when questioning orders could be considered treason, that some missions revealed truths that were more dangerous than enemy action. The compound contained buildings that didn't match any known North Korean or Chinese military architecture, didn't match Soviet designs that intelligence agencies had documented, matched American industrial construction patterns, matched pharmaceutical manufacturing facilities, matched research installations that were used for medical experimentation, matched the kind of facilities that American companies built in remote locations where oversight was impossible and accountability could be denied. Through binoculars, the Marines could see personnel moving between buildings, wearing hazmat suits, and carrying equipment that was clearly for handling dangerous chemical or biological materials, could see trucks arriving with supplies that bore American corporate markings, could see aircraft landing on a runway that was large enough for American military transport planes, could see communications equipment that was more sophisticated than anything North Korean forces were known to possess, could see evidence of activities that proved this facility was American, not enemy. Chen intercepted radio communications that confirmed their worst suspicions, conversations in English between personnel who were discussing test results, experimental protocols, and elimination procedures, not military communications about combat operations. Scientific communications about human experimentation, about chemical weapons testing conducted on prisoners of war, about biological agents designed to target specific ethnic populations, about activities that violated every international law governing medical research and military conduct. Rodriguez discovered that his radio equipment was being jammed by American jamming devices, positioned around the compound perimeter, devices that proved someone didn't want the reconnaissance team to report what they were finding, didn't want them to call for extraction, didn't want them to survive long enough to testify about American activities at what was officially classified as an enemy installation, wanted them to disappear as completely as the prisoners who were being used as test subjects in the laboratories they were observing. Thompson used his sniper scope to examine the facility more closely and saw something that changed everything. American personnel supervising North Korean and Chinese workers who were constructing additional buildings. American equipment being installed by American technicians. American corporate logos on vehicles and supply containers. American flags hanging inside buildings that were supposed to belong to enemy forces. Evidence that proved this facility was an American operation, disguised as an enemy installation, to provide plausible deniability for activities that couldn't be conducted on American soil. Martinez realized that the chemical weapons they were supposed to investigate weren't enemy weapons. They were American weapons, being tested on enemy prisoners. Weapons that were being developed for use against Chinese and North Korean forces. Weapons that were being perfected through human experimentation, conducted on captured soldiers who had been classified as missing in action rather than prisoners of war, to avoid international monitoring. Weapons that required testing on human subjects who couldn't complain to regulatory authorities or international oversight organizations. Johnson examined the medical facilities through telephoto lenses and recognized equipment that was identical to apparatus used in American hospitals and research institutions. Equipment that was designed for surgical procedures, pharmaceutical testing, and biological research. Equipment that was being used to conduct medical experiments on prisoners who had been captured specifically for research purposes. Prisoners who were being subjected to tests that would have been illegal if conducted on American subjects. Tests that were designed to develop weapons that would later be used against American enemies without regard for international laws governing chemical and biological warfare. Williams intercepted communications that revealed the scope of the operation. The facility wasn't just conducting chemical weapons research, it was also testing biological agents, developing psychological warfare techniques, perfecting interrogation methods, and conducting medical experiments designed to determine the effects of various substances on different ethnic populations. It was a comprehensive research installation that used the Korean War as cover for activities that would have been considered war crimes if conducted by enemy forces. Anderson discovered transportation records that showed regular shipments of test subjects being delivered to the facility. Not prisoners captured in combat, civilians who had been abducted from villages throughout North Korea and China. Men, women, and children who had been classified as missing or killed in action to prevent international monitoring of their fate. People who had been selected specifically for their ethnic characteristics, age groups, and medical histories. People who had been turned into laboratory animals for research that served American corporate interests rather than American military objectives. The Marines realized they weren't conducting reconnaissance of an enemy facility. They were witnessing American war crimes being conducted under the cover of a military operation that provided plausible deniability for activities that violated every principle of military justice and international law. They were observing activities that were being funded with American taxpayer money, conducted by American personnel, and supervised by American officials who would deny any knowledge if the operation was ever exposed. At 11:47 hours, their position was discovered by facility security personnel who weren't North Korean or Chinese soldiers, were American security contractors who had orders to eliminate anyone who approached the compound without authorization, who had been told that any personnel in the area were enemy infiltrators who needed to be neutralized, who had been given permission to use lethal force against American Marines to protect American activities that couldn't be acknowledged without destroying American credibility in the international community. The firefight began without warning. Automatic weapons fire from positions that had been prepared specifically to eliminate reconnaissance teams, not crude North Korean weapons, but American military equipment operated by personnel who had been trained in American tactics, personnel who knew exactly how American reconnaissance teams operated and exactly how to counter their capabilities. Personnel who had been waiting for American Marines to discover the facility so they could be eliminated as security threats. O'Brien ordered his team to withdraw to defensive positions while calling for air support that would never come, calling for artillery assistance that had been canceled without notification, calling for extraction by helicopters that had been rerouted to other missions, calling for help from military units that had been told the reconnaissance team had been eliminated in combat with enemy forces, fighting American contractors who were using American weapons to eliminate American Marines who had discovered American activities that were officially denied. Chen used his knowledge of Chinese tactics to outflank security positions that had been designed to counter North Korean and Chinese forces, not Marines who understood Asian military techniques. Eliminated 3 contractors who were carrying identification that proved they were American citizens employed by American corporations, citizens who had been told they were protecting American national security by eliminating American soldiers who had seen too much to survive, citizens who died believing they were serving their country by killing other Americans who were actually trying to serve their country. Rodriguez managed to restore radio communication long enough to transmit a brief message about American activities at coordinates that were officially classified as enemy territory, message that was intercepted by American intelligence services, who immediately classified the information at levels that prevented any investigation or follow-up, message that confirmed American officials knew about the facility, knew about the research, and knew about the elimination of American personnel who discovered activities that couldn't be acknowledged. Thompson used his sniper skills to eliminate facility personnel who were attempting to call for reinforcements that would overwhelm the Marine reconnaissance team. Personnel who were using American communication equipment to contact American support units that would respond with overwhelming force. Personnel who died before they could complete transmissions that would have brought American aircraft, American artillery, and American ground forces to eliminate 8 Americans who had discovered American activities that violated American values. Martinez used his demolitions training to destroy facility infrastructure that contained evidence of American human experimentation, not to eliminate enemy capabilities, but to destroy proof of American war crimes. Explosions that eliminated documentation, destroyed equipment, and killed test subjects who could have testified about activities that were funded by American corporations and supervised by American officials. Explosions that served American interests by concealing American crimes rather than by defeating American enemies. Johnson treated wounded Marines while using medical knowledge to sabotage research activities that were designed to develop weapons for use against American enemies. Sabotage that saved the lives of test subjects who were being used for experiments that would have provided information for developing chemical and biological weapons. Sabotage that prevented American corporations from completing research that would have been profitable but morally indefensible. Sabotage that served American values by opposing American activities that violated those values. Williams used his communication expertise to intercept and jam facility communications that were attempting to coordinate the elimination of American Marines who had become inconvenient witnesses to American activities. Communications that proved American officials knew about the operation, approved of the research, and authorized the elimination of American personnel who discovered what was being conducted in their name. Communications that provided evidence of conspiracy that extended to the highest levels of American military and civilian leadership. Anderson used his youth and speed to rescue test subjects who were being used for experiments that would have provided data for weapons development. Rescue operations that saved lives but also preserved witnesses who could testify about American activities if they survived long enough to reach international authorities. Witnesses who could prove that American forces were conducting activities that were identical to war crimes committed by enemy forces. Witnesses whose survival threatened to expose activities that required secrecy to continue. The firefight continued for 3 hours. 8 Marines, against an unknown number of American security contractors who had superior numbers, better positions, and unlimited ammunition supplies. Marines who were fighting for their lives against Americans who had been told they were protecting American security. Americans killing Americans to protect American activities that betrayed American principles. Combat that served no legitimate military purpose, but was essential for protecting corporate interests that profited from activities that would have been considered treason if conducted by foreign agents. The Marines managed to extract critical evidence of American human experimentation while fighting their way out of the compound. Evidence that proved American corporations were using the Korean War as cover for activities that were illegal under American law and international agreements. Evidence that documented the use of American military personnel to capture test subjects for experiments that served corporate interests rather than military objectives. Evidence that revealed conspiracy between American officials and American corporations to conduct activities that violated every principle of American justice. But extraction required crossing 40 miles of hostile territory while being pursued by American forces that had been told they were chasing enemy infiltrators. Forces that had orders to eliminate the reconnaissance team to prevent exposure of activities that could embarrass American leadership and destroy American credibility. Forces that were willing to kill American Marines to protect American officials who had authorized activities that were indistinguishable from war crimes committed by American enemies. The pursuit began at 15:34 hours, when American aircraft began bombing coordinates that were transmitted by facility personnel who survived the Marine assault. Bombing that was officially attributed to operations against enemy targets, but was actually designed to eliminate American personnel who possessed evidence of American war crimes. Bombing conducted by American pilots who believed they were attacking enemy positions, but were actually participating in the elimination of American witnesses to American activities that violated American law. O'Brien led his team through terrain that had been mapped by American intelligence services, who provided the maps to American forces that were pursuing American Marines. Maps that showed every possible escape route, every potential hiding place, every source of water and shelter. Maps that gave pursuing forces decisive advantages in terrain that should have provided concealment and protection for Marines who were trying to reach American lines while carrying evidence that could expose American crimes. Chen used his language skills to communicate with Chinese forces who were operating in the region, convincing them that American Marines were carrying information that could expose American activities that violated Chinese sovereignty, information that Chinese forces could use to embarrass American leadership and undermine American credibility, information that made American Marines valuable as intelligence sources rather than targets for elimination, information that transformed Chinese enemies into temporary allies against American forces that were pursuing American soldiers. Rodriguez maintained communication with Marine units that were searching for the reconnaissance team, providing false information about their location and status to prevent American forces from intercepting evidence of American war crimes. Communication that required deceiving American commanders who were participating in the elimination operation without understanding what they were eliminating. Communication that served American interests by opposing American officials who were betraying American values. Thompson used his marksmanship to eliminate American personnel who were attempting to prevent the reconnaissance team from reaching safety. Personnel who died, believing they were serving American interests by killing Americans who were actually serving American interests. Personnel whose deaths were necessary to preserve evidence that could prevent future American war crimes, but required opposing current American activities. Personnel who became casualties of conflicts between American officials who served different masters. Martinez used his demolitions expertise to create obstacles that delayed American forces pursuing the reconnaissance team, obstacles that served American interests by opposing American forces, obstacles that protected Americans from Americans who had been ordered to kill Americans to protect Americans who were betraying American principles, obstacles that required destroying American equipment and potentially killing American personnel to preserve American evidence of American crimes committed against American values. Johnson treated civilians who had been wounded in crossfire between American Marines and American forces pursuing them, treatment that served humanitarian principles while complicating military operations, treatment that preserved witnesses to American activities while endangering American personnel who were trying to expose those activities, treatment that demonstrated American values while opposing American officials who were violating those values through activities that required the elimination of Americans who discovered them. Williams used his technical knowledge to intercept American communications about the pursuit operation. Learning that American forces had been told they were chasing enemy infiltrators who possessed classified information, forces that didn't know they were pursuing American Marines, forces that had been lied to by American officials who were using American military personnel to eliminate American evidence of American war crimes, forces that were unwitting participants in activities that served American corporate interests rather than American national interests. Anderson helped evacuate test subjects who had survived the facility assault and possessed first-hand knowledge of American human experimentation, evacuation that preserved witnesses while complicating escape operations, evacuation that demonstrated American humanity while exposing American inhumanity, evacuation that served American values by preserving evidence of American crimes committed by Americans who claimed to be serving America through activities that betrayed everything America was supposed to represent. The chase continued for 6 days across terrain that was controlled by Chinese forces who had been convinced that American Marines possessed information valuable for opposing American activities that violated Chinese sovereignty, Chinese forces that provided protection and assistance to Americans who were being pursued by Americans, Chinese enemies who became temporary allies against American forces that were serving American officials who were betraying American principles through activities that served American corporate interests. Evidence carried by the Marines proved that American corporations had been conducting human experimentation on prisoners of war who were classified as missing in action to prevent international monitoring. Experimentation that was designed to develop chemical and biological weapons for use against Chinese and North Korean forces. Experimentation that was funded by American military budgets, but served American corporate interests rather than American military objectives. Experimentation that violated every principle of American justice while claiming to serve American security. The research conducted at the facility had produced weapons that were later used against Chinese forces, without regard for international laws governing chemical and biological warfare, weapons that had been tested on human subjects who were selected for their ethnic characteristics, weapons that were designed to be more effective against Asian populations than against American populations, weapons that represented the militarization of racial discrimination through scientific research that claimed objective validity. But the evidence also revealed that American officials planned to use the weapons and research techniques domestically against American populations that were considered security threats. Populations that included American citizens who opposed American foreign policy, American activities in Korea, and American military spending that served corporate interests rather than national interests. American officials using American resources to develop weapons for use against Americans who exercised American rights to oppose American policies. The Marines reached international waters on December 3, 1950, after evading American forces for 7 days, while protecting evidence that documented systematic American war crimes, evidence that was immediately classified by international authorities who understood that exposing American activities would destabilize American leadership during a conflict that required American participation for Western security, evidence that was protected by America's enemies, because America's friends couldn't afford to acknowledge what America was actually doing. The reconnaissance team was officially declared missing in action, presumed killed by enemy forces, while conducting operations against North Korean chemical weapons facilities. Their families were told they had died heroically serving American interests in Korea. Their sacrifice was used to justify increased military spending and expanded chemical weapons research. Their deaths became propaganda for activities that they had died trying to expose. Their memory was used to support exactly the policies they had given their lives to oppose. But they didn't die in Korea. They lived as stateless persons in countries that protected them, because they possessed evidence that could embarrass American leadership. Countries that were America's enemies, but protected Americans who had discovered American activities that were enemies of American values. Countries that used American evidence of American crimes to oppose American policies without acknowledging that American Marines had provided the evidence through their sacrifice of American citizenship to preserve American principles. The facility continued operations using different personnel and different security measures. The research continued using different locations and different methods. The weapons development continued using different subjects and different justifications. American war crimes continued because American criminals were never prosecuted, because American evidence was classified by American officials, because American witnesses were eliminated by American forces, because American accountability would have required admitting that American activities were indistinguishable from activities that Americans condemned when conducted by American enemies. This story ends here, but the research doesn't end. It continues in facilities that don't appear on American maps, conducted by personnel who don't officially exist in American records, funded by budgets that aren't audited by American oversight, supervised by officials who aren't accountable to American voters, justified by threats that are manufactured to validate activities that create the threats they claim to address, protected by secrecy that protects American criminals rather than American victims. 8 Marines learned that the greatest threat to American security comes from Americans who profit from American insecurity, that the most effective way to destroy American values is to claim you're defending them while systematically violating everything they represent, that the only way to serve America is to oppose Americans who have captured American institutions and use them to serve interests that are fundamentally hostile to American principles, that patriotism requires treason when your country is controlled by people who view patriotism as a marketing strategy. The Korean War became a laboratory for techniques that were later used in Vietnam, Iraq, Afghanistan, and other conflicts, where American forces conducted operations that served American corporate interests rather than American national interests. Operations that were justified by American security requirements, but actually created American security threats. Operations that were supposed to defend American values, but actually destroyed them through activities that were indistinguishable from activities conducted by American enemies. The evidence preserved by 8 Marines documented American activities that continued for decades after the Korean War ended, activities that were expanded during subsequent conflicts, activities that were refined through technological advances, activities that were legitimized through legal frameworks that made war crimes legal when conducted by Americans against non-Americans, activities that were eventually used against Americans who opposed American policies that served American corporate interests rather than American popular interests. Some truths are too dangerous for Americans to acknowledge, too expensive for American officials to admit, too revealing for American institutions to declassify, too honest for American systems that depend on lies to survive. This is one of them. The truth that American Marines died not to defend America from foreign enemies, but to protect America from American activities that were more dangerous than any foreign threat. That military service became complicity in activities that betrayed military values. That classified operations became cover for criminal enterprises. that national security became a weapon used against the nation it claimed to protect. The war continues in laboratories that serve American corporations rather than American citizens, fought by personnel who profit from conflict rather than seeking victory, funded by American taxpayers who don't know what their money supports, supervised by American officials who serve American corporations rather than American people, justified by American security requirements that actually create American insecurity, protected by American classification systems that protect American criminals from American justice. This story is classified, will remain classified, will be denied if discovered, will be attributed to enemy propaganda if published, will be used to justify expanded security measures if investigated, because acknowledging the truth would require admitting that American institutions have been captured by interests that are fundamentally hostile to American values, that American military power serves American corporate objectives rather than American national interests, that American soldiers are sacrificed to protect American war criminals from American accountability, that American democracy has been destroyed by Americans who claim to be defending it. The Korean mountains keep their secrets. The evidence remains hidden in archives controlled by America's enemies. The truth survives in fragments, protected by people who can never return to America without signing their own death warrants. Justice waits for authorities who will never be granted authority to deliver it. Accountability depends on systems designed to prevent accountability. Honor requires dishonor. Service requires desertion. Loyalty requires treason. Patriotism requires becoming an enemy of people who have stolen your country and sold it to the highest bidder. 8 Marines learned that serving American democracy requires discovering that American democracy is dead, that American freedom costs more than Americans can afford, that American liberty requires eliminating Americans who take it seriously, that the only way to protect America is to protect it from Americans who are running it, that the only way to honor American values is to oppose Americans who violate them, that the only way to serve the American flag is to protect it from Americans who use it to justify activities that betray everything it represents. The compound was destroyed. The evidence was buried. The witnesses were eliminated. But the system that created the compound, buried the evidence, and eliminated the witnesses continues to operate, continues to use American resources to conduct activities that serve American corporate interests, continues to sacrifice American personnel to protect American activities that violate American law, continues to betray American principles while claiming to defend them, continues to destroy America while claiming to serve it, continues to prove that the greatest enemy of America is America itself.